As the world watches with growing concern over the intensifying trade tensions between China and the United States, most recently marked by China's announcement of new tariffs on American goods, followed by a counter-response from the Trump administration, a new development has emerged. Just a few hours ago, the European Union announced a comprehensive, multi-phase retaliatory tariff plan targeting a wide range of American products. This move follows the United States' imposition of new tariffs under President Donald Trump, including a 25% tariff on EU steel and aluminum, as well as broader 20% duties on various EU imports. The EU's response, which targets up to 22 to 23 billion euros worth of U.S. exports, signals a significant escalation in transatlantic trade tensions. It highlights the broader challenges facing global commerce in a climate increasingly shaped by nationalist and protectionist policies. Notably, the EU's retaliation plan is structured and strategic. Rather than issuing a blanket response, it adopts a phased, tiered approach designed to apply economic pressure while leaving room for diplomatic resolution. The three-phase rollout begins in mid-April and is set to conclude in December 2025. Starting April 15, 2025, the EU will implement the first phase of its response. This phase targets approximately €3.9 billion worth of U.S. exports, with a 25% tariff on a range of products, particularly steel and aluminum, which had previously been subject to U.S. tariffs. By mirroring the U.S. approach, the EU aims to signal reciprocity. Other affected goods include motorcycles, orange juice, corn, rice, and large household appliances such as washing machines and dishwashers. These items were selected not only for their economic relevance but also for their political symbolism. Many originate from U.S. regions considered politically significant, particularly in the industrial Midwest and agricultural South. Phase 1 is therefore both an economic countermeasure and a strategic message, demonstrating the EU's ability to respond in ways that may impact key political constituencies in the United States. Phase 2, set to begin on May 16, 2025, significantly expands the scope to approximately €13.5 billion worth of U.S. exports. This stage shifts focus toward agricultural and consumer goods, two areas with considerable political influence in the U.S. Affected agricultural products include poultry, beef, apples, cherries, cereal grains, and vegetable oils. These are vital exports for many U.S. farming states and often central to domestic policy debates. By targeting them, the EU aims to increase domestic pressure within the U.S. to pursue a negotiated resolution. Consumer goods like clothing, textiles, glassware, and kitchen utensils are also included in this phase, widening the economic impact beyond agriculture to include urban and industrial sectors. These industries are closely tied to influential lobbying groups and trade associations, which could amplify the broader effects of Phase 2, not just for exporters, but also for retailers and manufacturers with global supply chains. The breadth and diversity of targeted goods in this phase increase the EU's leverage in trade discussions. Phase 3, scheduled for December 1, 2025, is more selective in scope but remains strategically important. It will involve tariffs on approximately €3.5 billion worth of goods, focusing mainly on high-value agricultural products. Exports such as soybeans and almonds are representative of U.S. agriculture and are primarily grown in important regions like California and several Midwestern states. These areas often have significant influence in national elections and host some of the most active agricultural lobbying groups in Washington, D.C. In this context, Phase 3 functions as a strategic reserve, a pressure mechanism the EU can activate if negotiations falter or tensions escalate. The inclusion of soybeans, one of the most widely exported U.S. agricultural products, highlights the EU's approach to applying pressure on sectors that are both economically important and politically sensitive. A particularly strategic element of the European Union's trade policy is its selective use of tariffs during trade disputes with the United States. Instead of targeting only economically valuable goods, the EU often chooses products that have political significance in key U.S. regions, aiming to influence American decision-makers by affecting industries tied to critical voter bases. For example, motorcycles, especially iconic brands like Harley-Davidson, are more than just export items. They symbolize aspects of American cultural identity and manufacturing heritage. Tariffs on these goods send a symbolic signal that resonates beyond basic economic impact. The EU's strategy also involves targeting agricultural exports that are central to U.S. swing states, states that were influential in the 2016 presidential election. Crops such as soybeans and almonds, extensively cultivated in places like Iowa and California, generate significant revenue and are connected to influential farming interests and voter groups. Likewise, beef and poultry exports largely come from the Midwest and southern states, where the agricultural sector holds both economic power and political relevance, particularly among conservative constituencies. By focusing on these sectors, the EU seeks to apply pressure on regions that are especially impactful in shaping U.S. policy decisions. Products like orange juice and rice, which are significant exports from Florida and other southern states, also fall under this category of politically sensitive goods. Florida, known as a swing state, plays a prominent role in presidential elections, meaning that economic impacts there can become a strong point of leverage in trade negotiations. By imposing tariffs on such regionally concentrated exports, the EU aims to influence public and political sentiment in response to U.S. trade policies perceived as unfavorable. Interestingly, the EU's recent choice to exclude bourbon whiskey from its latest round of retaliatory tariffs suggests a shift in approach compared to previous disputes. Bourbon, which had previously been targeted due to its cultural and economic significance, particularly in Kentucky, was left off the tariff list. This decision was partly influenced by lobbying from EU member states such as France and Italy, who raised concerns that continued escalation might provoke a damaging cycle of retaliation, potentially harming their own wine and spirits industries in the U.S. market. This restraint reflects the EU's attempt to balance political pressure with the need to avoid a trade conflict that could negatively impact European exporters. The trade relationship between the European Union (EU) and the United States (US) is one of the most significant globally, involving high volumes of goods and services. Based on the latest available data, this report outlines the trade volume and value between these two major economies. In 2024, the EU exported goods worth €531.6 billion to the US, a 5.5% increase compared to 2023. In contrast, Imports from the US to the EU totaled €333.4 billion, reflecting a 4% decline from the previous year. This resulted in a trade surplus of €198.2 billion in favor of the EU. The EU's exports were led by medicinal and pharmaceutical products, which made up 22.5% of the total. Other major categories included road vehicles, 9.6%, general industrial machinery and equipment, 6.4%, electrical machinery and parts, 6%, and specialized machinery for particular industries, 5%. On the import side, manufactured goods represented a significant portion, with machinery and vehicles accounting for 31% and chemicals 25% of imports from the US. The EU maintained notable trade surpluses in categories such as machinery and vehicles, €102 billion, chemicals, €92 billion, and other manufactured goods, €57 billion. The services sector also plays a significant role in EU-US trade relations. In 2023, total bilateral trade in services was valued at €746 billion. The EU exported €319 billion worth of services to the US, while importing €427 billion, resulting in a services trade deficit of €109 billion for the EU. Beyond trade, investment flows between the EU and the US are substantial. As of 2022, companies from both regions held investments totaling €5.3 trillion in each other's markets. These investments are important drivers of economic activity and employment. For example, U.S. exports of goods and services to the EU support approximately 2.3 million jobs in the U.S., while EU firm investments in the U.S. support around 3.4 million jobs. Between January 2023 and December 2024, EU exports to the US increased from €39.8 billion to €45.4 billion. During the same period, imports from the US declined from €31.3 billion to €27.5 billion. As a result, the EU's trade surplus with the US expanded from €8.4 billion in January 2023 to €17.9 billion in December 2024. Compared to other non-EU countries, from January 2023 to December 2024, EU imports from the US decreased by 12.3%, while imports from other non-EU countries decreased by 12.9%. EU exports to the US rose by 14.2%, whereas exports to other non-EU countries decreased by 1.2%. In the global trade landscape of 2023, the US was the third largest exporter of goods, with exports valued at €1,869 billion, representing 10.4% of global exports. China ranked first with €3,125 billion, 17.5%, followed by the EU with €2,557 billion, 14.3%. On the import side, the US was the largest importer, with €2,934 billion, 15.9%, followed by the EU at €2,523 billion, 13.7%, and China at €2,364 billion, 12.8%. The European Union's approach to trade retaliation is complex and requires a high level of consensus among member states due to the bloc's diverse economic and political perspectives. In this specific case, 26 out of 27 EU countries supported retaliatory measures against the United States, indicating a rare level of agreement on a contentious issue. This widespread support underscores the seriousness with which the EU views the trade conflict and enhances the credibility of its response on the international stage. Hungary was the only country to oppose the measures, continuing a pattern of alignment with positions previously supported during the Trump administration. Although symbolically significant, Hungary's opposition did not affect the adoption of the measures. Under EU rules, unanimous consent is not required for such trade actions, allowing the majority view to prevail. The EU Trade Commissioner emphasized the bloc's commitment to a balanced and strategic response, describing the retaliatory measures as measured, proportionate, and reversible. This wording reflects a willingness to engage in negotiation while asserting the EU's capacity to act decisively when its economic interests are at risk. By presenting the actions as principled rather than punitive, the EU aims to position itself as a responsible actor in global trade. The imposition of retaliatory tariffs by the EU has notable economic effects, not only on transatlantic trade but also on the industries and workers involved. For U.S. exporters, the impact can be immediate and complex. Access to the EU market, one of the world's largest, may decline as tariffs make American products more expensive and less competitive. This is especially challenging in sectors such as agriculture.